Hello, my name is Mimi Sullivan, and I am very excited to be here today to speak with you about trauma drama. Trauma drama is a synthesis of the expert consensus treatment guidelines for best practices for treating people who've been exposed to complex trauma. So it's complex trauma best practices guidelines as synthesized with the form of the professional improvisational theater. And you'd be amazed at how those two things synthesize together so beautifully, because they're each in 3 stages and they just really match together well. But before I begin to tell you about my research into trauma drama, I'd like to try a little risk. And I'm going to try to embody some of the things that I'm going to be talking about with trauma drama, because trauma drama itself is all action. People don't learn by being talked to or didactically taught. They learn by actually embodying the improvisational exercises and scenes and integrating that and imprinting with what they learned there. So without saying more, let me ask you if you'd be willing to join me in an improvisation. Now, I'm going to ask you to enroll yourself as an adolescent, as one of the kids that I studied. So you are an adolescent who, from birth, has been exposed to many types of complex trauma for many years, and you find yourself in one of 4 residential schools or a group home, one of 3 group homes in the New England area. And you are taking part in trauma drama as an adjunctive treatment, because in your setting, in your residential setting, you get clinical services that are the attachment, regulation, and competency model, ARC model, and you have therapy and so on. But either your therapist has thought that this would be something that you'd like, or you've decided that you would like to participate in a drama program. So you are being bused from your residence with kids from these other schools and group homes to I guess you would call it a community theater. It's a community theater, a real little theater where you are going to participate. And you come in with the other kids and the staff members who have driven you, and you're sitting around in a circle on the floor. And there are troop members. There are 7 or 8 troop members. Now, the troop members in the trauma drama troop that I studied, where they could be actors, they could be a mix of actors and clinical staff or support staff. But in this case, they were all clinical staff and support staff at the residences who had wanted to participate and by audition had gotten a role as a troop member, and they had particular characteristics that made them awesome. Some of them had a theater background, but anyway, there are 7 troop members there with you. And so where I'm going to place you is that the session has started, everybody has arrived, and you've done like a little warm-up game and maybe had a check-in question. But now it's time for another game before we move on to scene work as the second stage of the session. So this is still the first stage. And I'd like you to experience one of the games. Now, this game, as Simon says, trauma drama doesn't use a lot of elimination games, but this one can be so fun and teach so much that it does use this one. And I'm using it for illustration here because it won't take a lot of explanation. You probably already know how to play, Simon says. In order to do this improvisation, I am going to enroll myself as one of the troop members, he's a troop member of another troop that I've seen, and his name is Kevin Charles Smith, and he is like the king of Simon Says. So let me enroll myself as Kevin, and I've got my trauma drama shirt on, just like the troop members would. So to remember, now you're an adolescent kid. Now think of yourself as one of these kids from one of the residences, and you're sitting around in the circle. Okay, everybody, get up, get on your feet, everybody around, everybody gather around, and you 2 staff members who transported and clinicians, because everybody, as you know, equally participates in trauma drama, and this will be fun. So you guys haven't played Simon Says before, have you? You have. Well, let me go over the rules of Simon Says anyway. So how it goes is if Simon says something, you do it. So if Simon says, put your hand on your nose, Simon says, put your hand on your head, put your hand on your wrist. If Simon didn't say it, don't do it. If you put your hand on your wrist, you're out. So just a little review there. Now, before we begin, I just like all of you to take a breath and look at a spot in front of you. And as you look at that spot in front of you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most activated you could be and 0 being really asleep, where would you put your energy? 0 to 10. I would put mine in a 7.5 because I'm really excited to share this with you. So, all right, everybody ready to go? So let's see. Simon says, let's start the game. But before we start, everybody take like one step forward. Did you take a step forward? Simon didn't say to take a step forward. So you are out. Okay, all right, let's go on. Ready? Okay, Simon says, put your hand on your head. Simon says, put your hand on your shoulder. Simon says, put your hand on your other shoulder. Simon says, put your hand on your heart. Put your hand on your other shoulder. Did you do that? You're out. Did it get anybody out here? You. I see you. All right. Now I'm going to enroll myself as a kid instead, who just got out. I am so stupid. The game just started and I'm out. Nobody else would ever be like me. Wait a minute. Some of the troop members got out. 2 of them, and they probably play this game all the time. And 2 other kids. Hey, I don't think those troop members are stupid. I really like them. I think they're pretty smart. They're goofy sometimes, but I think they're pretty smart. And if they got out and I got out too, maybe, and they're smart, well, maybe I'm not that dumb. It's just a game, right? It doesn't really matter. It's just fun. Okay, I'm okay now. All right, so when the game's over, I'm going to go back to being Kevin Charles Smith. Let me just go back to him. All right, everyone, now that we've wound up the game and I've gotten you all out within 5 minutes, you'll get better at this, trust me. Just notice a spot in front of you and a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 again. Decide, feel where your energy is. Mine's about a 5. That was enjoyable, but now I'm relaxed. Okay, now I'm Mimi again, and I am going to start my presentation, but that's a little bit of an example of a little improvisation on one of the games that we use. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. For the first 20 years of my professional life, I was an actor starting in childhood. But for the last 20 years of my professional life, I've been a therapist specializing in complex trauma. And I would like to tell you a little bit about how I came to studying trauma drama. So I'm this hybrid actor person, therapist person, but when I was a tween, I experienced several years of trauma. And I was looking for this presentation of a picture of myself at the age at which I experienced that trauma. And all of the photographs I found, I was smiling and looking happy, but I wasn't. And then I found this painting by a courtroom artist named Frida Reiter, and I looked sad in it. And that's how I felt. I felt alone, sad, stigmatized, different, like nobody could ever understand me. But then I had these wonderful acting teachers that taught me improv and the ways of theater that have been handed down for multiple generations, from one mentor to another student. And through improv and theater, I rediscovered myself. I got unstuck. I experienced spontaneity. I learned how to play characters, and through playing characters, I expanded my sense of self and found myself again, I guess. I resumed emotional development. Eventually, I became an actor. So I'd like to move forward through my life and tell you about 20 years later, when life was going fine. It was really good, actually. And I was excited because I got called to audition for The Sixth Sense. And I was one of maybe 3 people up for a particular part. It was a small part, but it was a good part. It was a creepy perpetrator person. And yeah, it was cool. I got up in front of the casting director, who is a friend of mine, Mike Lemon, to read the script. And just as I started to say my lines, I had emotional numbing. I could not find my emotions. They were gone. I tried like all my actor's bag of tricks, which had always worked to pull up any emotion, and I could get nothing. It was like an iron curtain came down. I started to speak these perpetrator lines and boom, no matter what I did, there was nothing there. Well, it was delayed onset PTSD. It was like the first sign from a chronic trauma that had ended the year before. And the way I think about it is that perpetrator scene had hair triggered my hidden trauma, which I would explain this way. The periaqueductal gray in the back of my brain received like a perpetrator signal, just a little tiny thing. And the innate alarm system of the brain relayed that signal, fast road, to my medial prefrontal cortex, which had very, very well rehearsed over a few years of the trauma that I had gone through, a really wonderful defense of just numbing out when it was going on so that I was not damaged. But now my brain had learned this fast road. This fast road had been blazed where any little hint of a perpetrator, even if it was like a fun acting scene, I would have this automatic response, and I didn't know how to dismantle it. It was really inconvenient as an actor, as you can imagine, because most plays and theater are involving conflict and there's an aggressor. So every time there was an aggressor scene, this would happen to me. And I didn't know what to do. There was no thinking involved in this process. I would just get a little hint or try to say a line, and then there would be complete numbing. So I tried cognitive therapy, because I knew it was related to the trauma that I'd experienced. And cognitive therapy was useful in many ways, and it was great. But it didn't help this reflex because you can't reason with a reflex that happens before you can even think about it. It happened before I could even have a thought about it. So I couldn't talk to it. There were no words that would dismantle it. So I had returned to what had healed me before, that my teachers had taught me and that I knew had worked. I started writing and acting little pieces about perpetrators that were fictional, occupying all different aspects of perpetration in my community of actors, other actors and writers. And they were actually really attracted to this work because so many of them had had similar experiences, which was a revelation to me at the time, that there were other people who could resonate with this. But we kept writing together. And here's a photograph of one of the projects that we worked on. And the bottom picture is of the director, Mike Lemon. He just passed away. He was very special. But Mike Lemon was, ironically, the casting director for The Sixth Sense, in which who I had frozen in front of, and he became part of this process. But through the process of doing these writing projects and acting projects, I also found that I became good at helping other people find their missing emotions. So I returned to school and got my MSW and became a therapist and have been for 20 years. But more recently, I went back to school to start a PhD. And during that time, I'd seen Bessel many times before, but I saw him speaking and loved the way he speaks, Bessel van der Kolk. But at this particular conference where I saw him speaking, he was showing video of kids participating in urban improv and trauma drama. And he was saying something to the effect of it. And this is my interpretation of what he said. It's probably not what he said, but this is the way I metabolized it. That drama helps the medial prefrontal cortex, that mine had specialized just on freeze, sometimes fight and flight, but mostly on freeze. He was saying that drama affects the medial prefrontal cortex in sort of practicing and teaching it in the fictional low risk circumstances, different roads, different ways it can connect in the brain to offer different options. So this is the way that I describe this phenomenon sometimes to my clients. On the left, you'll see the trauma response, the New Jersey Turnpike. you kind of have a reaction in that's Delaware at the bottom of the New Jersey Turnpike where you're like having a trigger. And then your mind just gets on the New Jersey Turnpike. And it's like this is the only road through New Jersey to New York. And you can go no other way. And you go straight to fight, flight, freeze, New York. But when we are trying to heal, what we want to do is on the right, have lots of highways and byways that we can take that are calibrated to any circumstance at hand, like not freezing when you're having an audition about a perpetrator, but perhaps freezing if there's a real perpetrator and that's correct response. So we want to have ourselves take the alternative highways and byways. And Bessel's point was that drama can help rehearse that. And I had an internal experience of that. So after his talk, I mentioned to Bessel that I was about to start a dissertation, and I was wondering if there was any way at all that I could help to advance research into drama. Maybe using a physiological measure, since to me, this was like a physiological knee-jerk reaction, like the fight, flight, freeze automatic response. Like, you know, you get a trigger, like you put your hand on a hot stove and it flies off. You're not thinking about it. So it's a very physical reflex. So I wanted to do a physiological measure. And he introduced me to Joe Spinazzola, who is the author of Trauma Drama and was about to start a trauma drama troupe in New England. And they welcomed me into the research space, which was completely awesome. This is my study. But before I talk about the study, the research into drama, I'd like to describe trauma drama itself because people always really want to know about it. And then the research results make a lot more sense. Trauma drama is really a well-crafted intervention for complex trauma-exposed people. As I said before, it's the synthesis of best practice guidelines for complex trauma and synthesized with the real form of professional improvisational theater. And I have a BFA in acting, so it's very familiar to me, and I was an actor. It's very true to what actors are taught. Yeah, and I have a PhD in social work. Did I say that? Just want to make sure you know you know where I'm coming from, I should say. So Joe Spinazzola developed the trauma drama model out of urban improv, which is like the big picture on the right, that model in Boston, which was studied in Boston school populations, and it was shown to be a promising way to halt the progression of youth aggression. It came out of the Living Stage outreach program at Arena Theater, which you'll see on the left, and any actors in the audience, of course, recognize Arena Theater. But both of those improvisational methods, those improvisational sort of intervention methods, I don't know if I call those therapy, but they're almost therapy, were based on the improvisational games and teachings of the great world improv teachers, Augustus Boal of Theater of the Oppressed and Viola Spolin. Spolin having started teaching improv at the birthplace of American social work, youth social workers, at Hull House, the settlement house in Chicago, from which then Viola Spolin and her son started Second City Improv, which led to Saturday Night Live and so many, all of the professional improv companies around the United States. So professional improv in the United States has its roots in Hull House and in social work. It's just a fun fact that I only found relatively recently, and it amazes me how full circle I've come to unify these things together myself. So this thoughtfully designed intervention was really a best case scenario for me to conduct an exploratory study that looked for universal indicators of drama's ability to heal. Because drama has been used for millennia to reintegrate traumatized people into society. The historical record is full of plays and incidences of this. We know this, but it's not widely disseminated as a form, and people don't therapists aren't drawn to train in it, and it's not funded by policymakers for the long run because there's not the kind of evidence, not that there isn't evidence, there's not the kind of evidence that legitimizes it to funders and policymakers. So my desire was to come up with an exploratory study that would look for variables and indicators of healing and treatment success. Because if we can find indicators, I'm thinking we will probably find them, or I would probably find them through studying people participating in this well-designed intervention. If I could find a culled down number of variables that we could all join together as a community on, or begin that process, so that we can get enough data to run statistical modeling and to be able to make a really good case to funders and policymakers and get therapists to want to train. That would be a cool thing. So that might be too technical for some people, but anyway, we need to study trauma. So I will describe the study participants, the kids as they called themselves. They were really a complex trauma exposed group of adolescents, as I said, in residential care at 4 residential schools and 3 group homes in New England that use the ARC attachment, regulation, and competency model of clinical care. And trauma drama was an adjunctive treatment. The 7 or 8 troop members were clinicians from the residences, not clinicians, but clinicians and staff members, as diverse a group as possible that had been chosen by the process of auditioning. And I drove all over New England in my little car with that chair, that Adirondack chair that you just saw, because I had to measure people for heart rate variability, and I wanted them all in the same position. So I went to each of the 7 sites 24 times over 2 years to measure the kids and to interview them. The sample was really diverse. So it's diverse for race, ethnicity, it's gender diverse. The kids had an average of 5 trauma types, and 78% experienced their first trauma before the age of 1. 100% of them were prescribed from 1 to 6 psychotropic medicines. And on average, they were 3 grade levels behind in school. 75% had neglect, but lots of different types of trauma, polytrauma, impaired caregiver, emotional abuse, foster care placements, in child protective services, custody, even though they were in the homes, 17% adopted, suicidal ideation, self-injury. So I did this very non-simple exploratory mixed method study in order to find a simple matrix of variables that we could join on together to research at a later time. It did physiological heart rate variability, and that relates to polyvagal theory that many people are familiar with. Survey instrument, 8 different instruments I collected data on. So those are standardized inventories like depression, executive function, etc. And I will briefly go over that. And I also did phenomenological interviews where I spoke to participants and asked them what trauma drama was to them. Now, for the phenomenological arm of the study, I had 41 participants that I interviewed, and that's actually a really, really large sample for phenomenological interviews. So interpretive phenomenological analysis, IPA, okay, simply ask one very open-ended question of participants. And to me, that's what I wanted to do, because I know I have a lot of feelings about drama, and I did not want to contaminate the participants with my feelings. I wanted them to express what was this to them. So this is the question that I asked, and the kids really all said the same things. It was pretty amazing. So in the next section of the talk, I'll describe the common experiences that kids expressed. The question was, what is trauma drama to you? That was it. And for some people, I changed the wording a little bit to be, if you had to describe what trauma drama was to a friend who was considering joining, how would you describe it? Trauma drama was all action, as I said, and not didactic teaching. So anything that the kids described to me had been, learned. They were imprinted with experience, and that's what they conveyed to me when I asked this question. And the first thing they described was that there were 3 phases, a beginning and a middle and an end structure to trauma drama. which I thought was really important that they integrated that beginning, middle, and end, because trauma itself doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. But each episode and each part of a trauma drama session had a beginning, middle, and end. So it seemed to internally imprint and perhaps to help kids to be able to chunk processing of their trauma experience, chunk change, chunk change as their beliefs and feelings about themselves were challenged, so that they could partialize it and metabolize it and incorporate it into their lives. I'm going to play a video. I hope it plays, because I would like, this is Joe Spinazzola, who is the author of Trauma Drama, and I know everybody wants to know what the actual session was like, and I think he describes it really well. Sometimes it takes...
So the way a typical session works in Trauma Drama, once everyone's arrived, we do an opening circle where we talk about the theme of the day. We've been surprised at how eager youth are to address really intense themes, but they want to know that that's what's coming. And so the opening circle sets the stage for that, and then typically will lead into an improvisational theater game that helps them warm up. From there, we typically go into the core scene work of the day, in which the staff depict a really vivid, often intense, very emotional scene related to a theme of adversity of some kind. When we get to the culminating point in the scene, the director of the scene freezes it and then asks the audience members what they think's going on, what they're feeling in their bodies, what they're noticing happening on the stage, what they would do in that situation. Ultimately, who wants to come up and play that character who has this seemingly impossible decision to make, this incredible challenge that they're presented with? And it's not always a simple, happy solution. And then we freeze it again, and someone else comes up, and then someone else. Sometimes we'll rewind, and we'll do a scene in reverse. Where could we go back to in a scene where a youth has made a decision that's really caused long-standing problems in their life, and how could they have avoided it? How could they have handled it differently? After that, there's typically a short discussion related to that theme, and then we'll move back into another fun, engaging, sometimes down-regulating activity. So that's how our sessions work day to day, and then over the course of the intervention, we have an arc that we follow to carve out different possibilities for their lives, for their identities, and for their futures.
As I said, everything Joe talks about in that clip, the kids who participated in the study spontaneously reported to me, just as he said it, believe it or not. They could recite the structure of the group, which, again, they appeared to have internalized. And they also talked about this very important thing, the troop member stance of openness that was adopted from theater. Because in theater, we don't have a stratification, we have an egalitarian structure. So everybody has a relatively equal voice. Just because you're older, you have more experience, you're not valued any less. Everybody contributes and is expected to contribute their part equally. So troop members, as I showed in the beginning, did all the exercises and participated in all the dramas equally with the kids. This was really important to the full engagement of the kids. So, for instance, Lucky said, but many of the kids said similar things. Not only the kids participated, but the staff did too. It's like we're family. We're not afraid to say stuff. I used to be afraid to tell somebody that how I was feeling, that I need help. But now I actually talk if I need help. The troop members also used a particular stance that I'm going to call behavioral self-disclosure. This is also part of theater, but it's characterized by being effectively open and allowing your true emotions and reactions to show, as opposed to the staff members and troop members' more boundaried professional demeanor that they demonstrated in the residences. So in the theater space, they were really open. Any spontaneous feeling that they had, pretty much they allowed to show. I mean, there was, of course, a little bit of a filter, and their reactions to the scenes and their true emotions to what kids were feeling showed. They didn't necessarily talk, they didn't talk about their own lives, but they did show how they felt. They were tuned and accessible in a deeper and more transparent way. And I'm going to try to play this video about Joe talking about how important that was.
Students and youth in our program have commented is that even though they know that staff member is just playing a character, it's led them to see that staff member in a different light. It's led them to feel like, you know what, this person really does seem to know what I've gone through. They're portraying these characters so well. They're struggling with the same struggles so well. I see the emotion in their face and in their bodies, and it's real, even though it's a character. Maybe they do understand me. Maybe I can trust them.
But what the kids expressed to me went beyond being understood. Once they've been felt and understood in such a profound way and attuned to in such a profound manner, they really thought that the troop members and staff members participating could possibly have been kids like they were with the problems that they had. But they also saw the troop members and staff members as these really amazing professional people with good lives. So many of them expressed, we don't really know what they've been through, what the troop members have been through. They perceived the troop members as having the possibility of having been like them. And then it kind of gave them hope that someday they could be like the troop members. They didn't always have to be identified with the worst part of their trauma. And that identification and that fusion that at the beginning of the study, at the beginning of the treatment, that they had experienced with feeling, not believing that they were they're like cognitively believing that they were the worst part of a representation of the worst part of what they'd experienced, but they really felt like they were the worst part of the trauma that they had ever experienced. They were fused. So as soon as they were able to see a different future in the persona of identification with the facilitators, the troop members, that fusion of themselves with the trauma started to change, and they started to turn, and their identities started to shift. So their identification through this behavior of self-disclosure was really important, because then they were able to start to allow themselves to not identify with the worst part of what had happened to them. And that's a quote that perhaps you read while I was speaking. You get this feeling from people in trauma drama, from how they act and what they say. It just gave me a total different mindset. Like, wow, I never knew she'd understand. I never knew anybody could. It really caught me by surprise. The troop members can't tell us what they've been through personally, but you can tell that they understand us. So when all of these ingredients that I've mentioned before, and some others that I don't have time to talk about, were present, but they're in the manual. It's like a very thoroughly explained treatment in the manual, step by step. But when all the ingredients are there, and the conditions of having the troop members model these behaviors, spontaneous change processes started to occur. Now, everybody reported this in different ways. It happened multiple times for the participants in the treatment group over time. And I will give you a couple of little examples of this sort of pivotal epiphany process, that when associations kids had to the traumas that they had experienced, the associations that kept them stuck, were confronted by material in the intervention, they had these spontaneous processes occur. And the spontaneous processes were common and perhaps are generalizable because of that, but they all led to ways in which people perceive the world changing. So they led to what I call schema or framework changes in feelings about attachment, trust, negative sense of self, and identity. The first process I'm going to talk about, I'm only going to talk about two. There are three or four that I identified. Is this MAT pivotal process that confronted associations to the trauma that it was really necessary to alter. So kids would be in the routine and ritual step one of the intervention, and they feel safe. Then they'd upregulate with a game that would get their energy up, and perhaps watching a scene that hit a certain level of being evocative, because scenes were archetypal scenes. So they were typical scenario stems that were improvised by the troupe of common things that happen to kids, like bullying, like some conflict dynamics, like bullying, and also scenes a little bit later into the intervention that were more evocative. about neglect. Neglect was really, really resonant with the group, and, assault, things like that. So this routine ritual upregulation, you were getting your heart pumping a little bit. Then all of a sudden there's a surprise for some reason. And the kid doesn't know whether to do what they've always done before or to take a safe risk and try something else in the containment of the group. And they decide to take a safe risk. And as a result of that risk, they make a discovery about that association. And then they downregulate after making the discovery, and they start to integrate. And it can be with the flow of the session. So the session is integration. And then over time, their identity starts to shift. So I'm going to first go over the way the map process occurs in a game. Now, this is a composite because trauma drama could appeal to all different kids, all different challenges, and all different gifts. So there were a whole bunch of not very verbal participants that I'm consolidating into this one and speaking on their behalf from having observed their behavior. But the next example that I'm going to give is actually taken from transcripts. So Bobby felt safe within the predictable routine of trauma drama. His arousal increased and upregulated while he was playing a fun game and he was running around. And suddenly he found that the game, like Simon says, was making him think under pressure. He was surprised because he's actually thinking under pressure, and he was really thrown off balance, and he knew the performance pressure was a big trigger for him. So he started to breathe really rapidly. But then he took a risk. He reminded himself that the people at Trauma Drama were not going to judge him. So he slowed his breathing down the way he'd practiced in some exercises in the group before, and he decided to risk staying in the game. And when he risked staying in the game, he discovered through the breathing and the risk that when he slowed down his breathing, he could think more clearly and he could pay better attention and he could remember more. So as the game ended, Bobby relaxed and he downregulated in anticipation of the scene work that was coming up, because he really liked watching the scenes. And he noticed that he felt good. He realized that he could figure out how to tolerate hard things, which consisted of a schema shift for him, a framework of life, looking at life shift for him, and that he could always use both breath manipulation as a tool to help him through. He could always use breath manipulation as a tool to help him through. His aunt had always called him a stupid wimp, and he had believed her, but today he'd been brave. The qualities of tenacity and bravery and resourcefulness began to integrate into his sense of self. So he's no longer like the stupid wimp who is so incapable, but he's starting to shift that and feel like maybe he has some good qualities. Now I'm going to talk about map in a game, the way Brianna described her experience. So Brianna had a long-standing association related to the history of neglect up to the age of 4. She had been really neglected up to the age of 4, and at which time she talks about having been adopted by some wonderful people. And more recently, she'd experienced some assaults. She felt really alone. It seemed like she never, even though she said her parents were wonderful, she never could experience anything but the fact that nobody would ever understand her. Nobody would ever be there for her. People were only there to judge her, that no one would ever respond to her, and nobody could ever truly help her. So now I'm going to explain how the map spontaneously worked on those really core associations. So this is from her transcript. She's watching an assault scene, so she would have experienced the regulation at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of the session, she would have upregulated with some game. She's sitting and watching a scene. Kids didn't know what the scenes were ahead of time. It helped their reactions to be more, it helped not to predict their reactions. The kids did not want to know ahead, and the troop members thought that that would not be helpful to them. So they began to have real reactions, real triggered reactions. So she's watching the scene about assault, which resonates with her own assault, and she's surprised by it. And she's surprised that she's watching it, because usually she'd just check out. and she wouldn't pay any attention, but she's watching. That's a risk. She says, I did watch because of my past assault experience. While all the other kids were jumping up onto the stage to figure out how to change the scene into a better situation, she makes a discovery. It made me realize that, especially after the fact, that, well, there are all these people that you can go to, and there's all these places that you can reach out to. And then she downregulates. I think that it changed my anxiety level about the assault. And then she has some schema shifts, including this, because I always felt like I just had to keep everything in. So now she knows she doesn't. And keeping everything in makes you obviously a little bit depressed because you're always thinking about it. And I think being able to let some things out really changed the way my emotions were. And it really made them a little less strong because I have very strong emotions. So watching the scene made the emotions relax a little bit and kind of dissipate. And being able to project her experience onto a scenario that was fictional but close enough to her own seemed to help Brianna process. One of the staff members remarked to me in his interview, he's talking about Brianna here, when she said to me, this is the staff member, she said, see, that scene was very difficult for me because of something in my past. Staff member says, we knew what Brianna's experience had been. She didn't have to explicitly say what happened to her. We had just viewed a scene in which a girl was assaulted. So this projective scenario and archetypes of characters are very useful, it seems, for this population. Brianna talks some more, though, about her associations to people and people's helpfulness. So I've been in programs a couple of times before, and I felt like the people there just wanted to hear bad stuff about me and use it against you. But now, realizing that there are so many other people who can help, it makes me realize that they're actually helping and stuff. I really didn't know that I could reach out to like school counselors or clinicians and stuff like that. I thought they were all just there to keep me in one place, neglected. But really, they're there to help. So I said, I was wondering, I said, okay, so if you were to return to one of those other programs or placements that you've been in the past, felt like nobody was there, with the skills that you have now, would it be different for you? Or was it the program that was untrusted? She said rapidly, I think it would be completely different for me. So when her associations changed, they populated to change her perception across time. So in the past, she realized apparently that there had likely been trustworthy helpers within reach, but she hadn't had the skills or perception to realize that there were people there that she could trust. And in the present, there are trustworthy helpers at her residence and in this group for sure. And in the future, she felt like there would likely be some trustworthy helpers available to her. So her associations were adjusted over time in a really good way for her. The associations did not go back to when she was neglected in babyhood and make that okay, because there wasn't anybody to reach out for her. So the associations corrected in a really good way. And her sense of identity shifted then. It was no longer fused with the trauma that nobody can ever fathom. She felt like she was herself, and she felt kind of like a normal person, which she hadn't before, whatever normal is. She said, I like them, and so I can like me and relax with me. She identified, and that is key. Identification has to happen before anything. Yeah, I'm really bad at forming friends, but I made so many friends at Trauma Drama, like everybody there, because they're such, I don't think people realize how nice people are these days. There are some bad people out there, but Trauma Drama helped me realize that people can be so nice sometimes. You can actually have friends and understand each other and actually have people be close. Even when I didn't know everybody that well, I still felt close to them because I felt like we understood who each other was. So it seemed like she felt like people could respond to her. And I would suggest that not only did Trauma Drama adjust the assault memory and her helplessness over assault, but drama and other naturalistic interventions like it actually reach back and get that pre-verbal neglect. And I think she was living the memory of neglect. Neglect had never left her. That's why she was feeling so isolated, because that was the memory. But drama reached back and got that earliest, worst pre-verbal memory and started to alter it and change it. And I don't know how you can target that. You can't really target that easily. So that's one of drama's superpowers, I think. And one of the things that makes it so hard to study, because when those associations change, they change in a way that's unique to each person. So other people would have gotten different things out of this assault scene. It would have altered their associations perhaps in different ways. So when everybody's experiencing something a little bit different, how do you measure that and show a general effect? I am saying that the change process, though, is a general effect. This 7-step process appeared to be. Well, I'm suggesting that it could be. We need to research that further. So finally, Brianna is feeling that people are responding to her, and I'm going to let Bessel talk about it. Again, I'm always anxious that these videos won't play, but we shall see.
You have the experience that people do not respond to you and that you become helpless. So traumatized kids don't expect anything back from the world. Then they get there on stage and they are somebody, and people act with them. They say, oh, I can be somebody. I can make a difference. If I don't show up for my theater class, other people are going to miss me. And the theater class isn't going to work. And a very large part of overcoming trauma is the restoration of synchrony with other people. In general, the world of therapy is very passive. People talk about how they feel, but it's not visceral. What trauma drama does, it puts you on stage and they try out different possibilities of how you might position your body, your muscles, your shoulders, your face, your voice in a different situation.
So as he says, most of these kids I really felt were sort of in a tower feeling. They felt to me like they were in a tower, often isolated on their own. They didn't think that anybody would ever respond to them. And then they found attunement and response. As this occurred, their identities shifted. They shifted away again from the identity that's fused with the trauma and the worst things that ever happened to them. And they started to notice their positive characteristics, like I'm funny, I'm witty, people laugh at me, I've got a sense of humor, I'm not my trauma, I'm brave, I'm curious, etc. And this relates to the new complex trauma diagnosis in the ICD-11, which is kind of a gift to us, because if you have a diagnosis, it's a little easier to form a research agenda around a diagnosis. And one of the critical aspects of that diagnosis is the fact that it highlights the negative sense of self that people who have been exposed to complex trauma experience. And it highlights the relational problems and the lack of connection. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about an instrument that you can use right now to collect that data on the way drama and other naturalistic interventions in which the providers are really attuned and people are really attuned and feel safe, shift people out of that negative sense of self and begin to open the response and attunement aspects of the person. Trauma drama really seemed to antidote those things. So by implicit means, trauma drama appeared to target and deliver person-specific precision treatment to sites of complex trauma injury, including sites of preverbal and other nonverbal traumatic injury, which could be a difference from the more explicit targeting of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral treatments. We really have to see if we should run head-to-head trials against more specifically targeted treatments and see what the difference is, though. So there, just to conclude for this part of my talk about the interviews that I conducted, there seem to be common across group results that we should look for again and see if this is truly a phenomenon and a way to express how drama and other interventions like it help people. So their change processes spontaneously occur when you have the right treatment ingredients and the right conditions of the right providers, like the MAP process, the modification of associations process, and the population across time process. And then if you have those if you have those change processes occurring, what appears to come out of them and probably is generalizable are that frameworks of looking at life schemas shift. So attachment, trust of self, others, and the world changes, and negative to positive sense of self shifts, and identity changes as well. This is the instrument that I was telling you about. This goes along with the new complex trauma diagnosis in the ICD-11. It's the International Trauma Questionnaire, ITQ. It comes in an adolescent version as well. It's much researched across cultures globally. And it's a really short instrument, and it's free, and you can get it online, translated into many different languages, and it possibly will pick up these generalizable changes. And a great way to use it to see which part of treatment is important, because right now there's a debate in the literature that the first part of treatment, which is safety, trust building, attunement, the first phase of treatment is not that important, and you can just go straight to the trauma. It's an interesting debate, but I think if we use this kind of instrument and we give it to our clients pre-test, or people participating pre-test, and then multiple times over the course of the intervention, we're actually going to capture the effect of the first part of treatment, which is a really important thing to prove, so that treatments treatments that do focus on that complex trauma specific treatments get funded, because you have to have research to get funded. But you could use this right now. So this is for a more clinical population generally, though, if you've got a clinical population. And the next slide I'm going to show is the trauma attachment and belief scale. And this can be used in a less clinical population. The language is specifically designed to be non-stigmatizing, but it looks at trauma and attachment beliefs regarding self, others, and the world. So it's a really great tool, I think. Not as studied, but really specific to the kind of effects that trauma and like interventions would have. So to summarize the qualitative part of the study in 2 words, people go from a state of absence from self, others, and the world to a state of presence to self, others, and the world, which is pretty cool. They materialize to self and to others. So the quantitative portion of the study, I'm going to go over really quickly, just because it's more boring and to most people, but also I can probably tell you a little bit and you'll get the idea. If you like p-values and you want to know more details about all of this, I have plenty in my dissertation, and there is a link to that at the end of this talk. So please feel free to go there, because there's a lot of stuff you can use if you're writing grants and material that might be useful to you. But I suggest reading from the middle to the end. That's the more interesting part, but the beginning part has all of the quantitative information. I looked at all of these instruments. So this is 8 instruments, pre, mid, and post test on all of the participants in the study. I was trying to pick up signal through all the noise. So I was looking at executive function to behavioral checklist, depression, PTSD, etc., looking to see if there's some construct or variable among the variables measured by these standardized instruments that show the way kids in drama treatment commonly heal. I spent a ton of time analyzing this mountain of data, and I pretty much got a lot of noise. This is all stuff that had p-values, and it did look like depression decrease for the overall group, but I didn't so much trust this. And I thought, hey, Mimi, if your theory is that drama is so powerful because it molds itself to the unique requirements of each individual, then it could mean that different symptoms change for different subgroups of people. Like there could be different types of people, physical types, certain levels of trauma, etc., that certain symptoms move for. So how can I find those groups and see which symptoms move for those smaller groups? I decided to look for nervous system subgroups in the physiological heart rate variability. So I'm looking for nervous system balance changes from the beginning of the study to the end of the study, as reflected in heart rate variability, the high frequency range, because that range is the most reliable range to look at. And it's kind of, if you're into polyvagal theory, it's giving evidence of where the parasympathetic nervous system is, the braking system. And I found 3 subtypes of people, but I just want to tell you that this is the calculation that I used, which I'm not going to go into more about it in my dissertation if you want. But again, I'm looking at nervous system balance from pre to post test. And I use this equipment, heart math equipment, because I thought if we're going to replicate these findings that I have, we all have to be able to measure them. And so many therapists have for biofeedback heart math equipment in their offices that they can use to gather this data if they want to. And actually, I did it on a desktop, but now you can measure people many times if you want through their cell phones, as long as they have like the little earpiece. And what I found, this is just very broad strokes, just the headlines, was that there appeared to be three different groups. There was a group that had previously been over-aroused at the beginning of the study that now were calm and really, really balanced. So you would think that for this calm group, if anything happened in the environment, that they were so well balanced that they could just not have to do flight, fight, freeze immediately, but that they would be able to calibrate their response to match the environment at hand, given a certain level of safety. So that was really good. There was a group that had appeared balanced at the start of the study, but then they appeared to sort of dissociate or go into their shells. And there was a group that had previously been sort of dissociated or checked out, it looked like, and they woke up. So these three groups had different trajectories of symptom changes, but the group that I'm just going to pull out one group and talk to you about it. I'd suggest though that for each one of, there's a rainbow outside. For each one of these groups, the changes were part of the progress of their system reorganizing and healing from trauma. There was not one that showed that they were all better. They were all I felt like they were all getting better based on what they had told me. So I'm going to pull out the calm group, the previously over-aroused group, because this is because they did achieve balance with regard to heart rate variability. So that would be a good outcome, but also because they were the group by far with the highest trauma load. And usually, this isn't the same with other conditions, but with complex trauma, the people with the highest trauma load do not improve at all. So the fact that in certain ways, this group improved the most is kind of interesting. It's intriguing, something to investigate further. So like I said, they had balanced out. And this is them. This is the blue line is the calming down group, and they're getting close to zero, which means that they're balancing. I'm just showing you that. I did this also in comparison to the comparison group, but that's a little complicated for this presentation. Again, I refer you to my dissertation. But then if you look at the calm group on the depression scale, the CDI-2, which seemed to be a good scale to measure this group, the rainbow is getting bigger. That CDI-2 seemed to be a good scale for measuring this group. They had a marked decrease in depression. So they started out pretty high in depression and they had a marked decrease in it. So again, they're not supposed to be getting better, but they are with the drama treatment adjunctively to their regular treatment. The comparison group didn't have this it didn't show the same thing in a word or two. So very interesting. Another interesting part of this is, again, that calming down group that had the lower depression I'm showing here. They had lower depression and they had lower affect dysregulation. So their affect dysregulation and depression got better, but their executive function got worse. Like, what's that about? Well, I think that makes sense because it's just an indication that the calming down group is resetting to a different balance. If you've been really depressed and your brain has been organized around depression, when that depression isn't there anymore and your brain is changing the way that it connects up and it's truly trying to reorganize, it makes sense that it's not organized. So executive function is going to look confused because your brain's not going to be able to figure out what's going on yet. I think it's just an indication of increased flexibility because you got to think of that flight, freeze, rigidity at the beginning of the study. We're looking for a system that is setting to a better balance of flexibility. So I would argue that we have to get to know where the subgroups are hidden in a general group, or if we're going to do this kind of symptom inventory measure, because it's going to look like nothing's going on if we look at the whole group, because everybody's going to cancel each other out. We have to find the hidden subgroups and look at their patterns of healing. And some things it's going to be a nonlinear path. Some things are going to get better, and at the same time, other things are going to get worse. But that's a sign of where that type is in their healing process. We have to be able to track people over time, like a long time, and look how that goes. And that is going to tell us so much. So we need to study change over time and in some way sort out the subgroups that are experiencing unique blends of symptom change. Trauma drama appear to deliver person-specific complex trauma. Personalized medicine, that's a term that everybody likes right now. They want personalized medicine within the group milieu. So very efficient, right? Trauma drama seem to be able to seek and find the first, worst, and pre-verbal, nonverbal, diffuse complex traumas that cognitive behavioral therapy might not have been able to locate. We'll have to see. We'll have to test it against cognitive treatments and see, and so much has to do with the attunement of the therapist. There are therapists who are just magic, and no matter what treatment you do, it's going to work because they've got the magic touch. Trauma drama, 96% of participants found trauma drama to be enjoyable, and 82% of participants spontaneously called it fun. They really thought it was fun, and they would conflate the word fun in the same sentence with a negative word like anxiety. I have so many incidences of this in my interview. Fun would always come in combination with something that's negative. So there's some sort of a change or reconsolidation that might be happening there. Drama finds and fixes hidden trauma. That's a superpower. It changes life trajectories. I believe this. We have to prove it. We need to prove that. So, look for potentially generalizable outcomes, meaning common processes like MAP and PAXT. And then what comes from that, the common schema shifts, attachment, trust, negative sense of self, etc. And think about using the International Trauma Questionnaire and the tabs to pick that up, because I'm pretty confident that those things are happening if a treatment is being run well, like a naturalistic treatment like trauma drama. So I would suggest using those, and look for unique nonlinear patterns of symptom changes by physiological subtype. We have to figure out what the subtypes are. We should get together and aggregate cross-setting data, because all of these interventions, run with fairly small groups. I studied 2 years in which there were 16 kids each in the groups. So, we have to get we have to put our data together so we can run statistical modeling on drama and find out really for whom it works, how it works, why it works. And statistical modeling can help with that. It really matters what people think themselves about whether or not they're helped and how they perceive their lives and whether it helps them to function. But statistical modeling will help us prove and improve our treatments. I'm going to let Joe have the last word if the video will run.
But for myself and virtually every other intervention team member we've had, it was the best part of my week. Staff who do very difficult work over the course of the week look forward to coming into trauma drama for that day. Kids from our residential programs talk about how it's the best part of their week. Trauma drama has been a real game changer for at-risk youth.
It really seemed to help the people who provided it with the heaviness of their very difficult work. It's a vicarious traumatization protection, it seems, because there's so much joy in it. And I think it really helped the kids a lot from just having to talk about heavy stuff and be in heaviness all the time. At any rate, I would like to thank all of these people, especially Joe Spinazzola, who was with me through this whole very long process and helped me to navigate my way through analyzing all of this data and welcomed me into the environment in order to be able to work with the kids. and also my Widener University committee who stuck with me for the long term, and the trauma drama troops themselves. I studied these guys in New England, but I've also been trained and have worked with the troops in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where Trauma Drama ran as ACT Out for 10 years at least, in Norman, Oklahoma, and Savannah, Georgia, and all of the wonderful people in improv, community service organizations, universities, and professional improv theaters that joined in with those troops. And lastly, here are some links. So if you want more information about trauma drama, please use the links on the left and you can find out whatever it is that you want to know. But if you want more information on the data or material from my dissertation to use in your grant writing or ideas about measuring your own interventions, that's on the right. My dissertation is open source, so you can find it even if you just look it up and lose the address. The web address. But I really appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with you and to share this journey. It means so much to me.